Welcome to the first session of our Community Change webinar series with special guests Severn Cullis-Suzuki and Mark Holmgren. In today's webinar, Severn will discuss the importance of disrupting what separates us in order to work together to understand and address the interconnections of the issues and challenges that are owned by all of us, not just experts, professionals, or activists. There are no single issues anymore, if there ever were. Gender issues, prejudice, violence against women, intergenerational justice, and environmental challenges are all woven together and call for our engagement collectively if we are to effect needed systemic change. Severn will share her vision of how working with and through our differences in solidarity and with a holistic mindset can create and sustain the big changes we need to live more effectively and efficiently on this planet. I'd like to welcome again our speakers Severn and Mark to the session today. Severn Cullis-Suzuki lives on the island of Haida Gwaii, where she lives with her husband and two of her children, her two sons. She is studying the Skidegate dialect of the endangered Haida language with elders and teaching her children. She recognized from an early age that society and ecology were in conflict, and at age 9 started an environmental children's organization, a group of friends committed to learning and teaching other kids about environmental issues. They fundraised to attend the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, where 12-year-old Severn delivered a powerful speech that garnered worldwide attention. This speech is still having an impact today. Severn served on UN Secretary General Kofi Annan's Special Advisory Panel at the UN World Summit in South Africa on Sustainable Development. She has published several books, including co-authorship of Notes from Canada's Young Activists. She has co-hosted a TV series in North America for children called Suzuki's Nature Quest, and currently hosts the 3rd season of the APTN series Samakwan Water Stories about Indigenous peoples' water issues. Severn is a board member of the David Suzuki Foundation. Severn will also be joining us as one of our featured keynote speakers at the upcoming Community Change Institute in Toronto, Ontario, September 26th to 30th. Mark Holmgren joined Tamarack in January 2016 to lead our Vibrant Communities initiative and sits on Tamarack's team of directors. His background includes providing executive leadership on 2 Edmonton-based inner-city human service agencies focused on addressing poverty and homelessness, as well as providing consultation to a number of groups on issues relating to social housing development, organizational change, strategy development, and leadership. Most recently, Mark served as CEO of Bissell Centre, where he led a team of 130 staff delivering Housing First services, assertive street outreach, family and children's services, and programs in the areas of mental health, addictions, homelessness prevention, FASD interventions, and employment services. Known for his big picture view and his ability to work on the ground, Mark has a long history of leading and contributing to social innovations that benefit low-income people. Examples include leading the collaboration design of the Community Bridge, developing a multi-purpose center with housing attached for inner-city seniors, leading the development of 3 social enterprises, and developing innovative approaches to employing marginalized populations. We're obviously in wonderful company today, so I will now turn it over to Severn and Mark to begin their presentation.
Thank you. Well, my name is Severn Cullis-Suzuki, and I'm happy to be speaking to you today. I'm talking to you from Haida Gwaii, which is off the west coast of Canada. There we go. Here's the slide that I want. I live in the community of Skidegate, which is Haida Village, a reservation that is a beautiful place to live, and it's been the traditional home of the Haida for a long, long time. Just a bit of context, I grew up in Vancouver. I went to school in the sciences, so I grew up in a very strong academic family. Everybody really believed very strongly in education, of course, and also in biological sciences, genetic sciences, physics sciences, that really strong influence. But at the same time, my whole life, I have greatly benefited from the generosity and the wisdom of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous thinking, and especially from Indigenous women. And it's really provided me with a very interesting real-life education, having these 2 sides of these 2 almost different sides of the brain really being exercised and trained. And I really recognize the significance of that now as an adult, and really believe that we need to bridge both ways of thinking, both sides of the brain, both different ways of looking at the world. The concept I want to touch on today is really about addressing the disruption in our current modern society. It's about synthesis, putting the world back together again. So can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And I don't know if you can hear, but there's a real racket going on outside my house right now. It's the eagles in the nest right above my house are really going crazy. I don't know what's happening, but something's going on out there. So here is this really quite striking image by Ted Bertinsky. Sorry, his name is spelled wrong on this slide, but he does these large-scale photographs of man-made landscapes, and this is a highway in LA. And I think that it really illustrates, well, his photos really illustrate the theme from this current incarnation of humanity, of reductionism, dissection of systems. And I really see this as it's really been a denial or an act of disconnect from the connections between us all that link all of us as individuals, all of us as members of different nations, all of us from different perspectives and walks of life. And the growth and rule and colonization of the globalized capitalist system has really driven this disconnect. This now huge system of organizing has really taken over all societies, and it's really disrupted the natural links between production and consumption that we always used to be. It's disrupted the connections between laborer and distributor and consumer. Totally severed the relationship between the site or place of resource extraction and then the location and therefore benefit of the processing of these raw materials. It's really been it's been something that has it's been a system that has completely disrupted today's generation from tomorrow's children, and it's really severed our sense of cause and effect. We don't really understand how our choices that we do every day actually have impacts down the line through the generations, but also around the world. And this is how we have climate change occurring today. This death by 1,000 cuts, all these little things that we've done without understanding the consequences. And this is how we find ourselves now the catalysts of the 6th mass extinction event in the history of life. Next slide, please. So this polarization, this disconnection, this siloization has even filtered through to the way that social movements are happening today. In the 60s, issues were all connected. People were for everything. They were for a different world. They were for the civil rights movement. They were for women's rights. They wanted environmental justice. All of these issues, just people wanted change. And I look back on those decades, and I wasn't part of them, but I mean the images, the heart, the idealism, it's unbelievably compelling. And the fact that there was so much solidarity. Next slide, please. This slide is quite it's quite striking to me today, especially in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement. The kind of solidarity that we were seeing at that time is really really impressive. Today we have a very different scene. I think there is a lot of solidarity, but we've gone through, but not as much as there was, and we've gone through a significant professionalization of the non-profit scene, and non-governmental scene, and the environmental and non-governmental scene, really following a lot of corporate models, and the creation of workplaces, organizations, and institutions based on the same frameworks that are causing our problems. And of course, the the beautiful Einstein quote is really wise. Well, Einstein said, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. We really need to think about emulating the capitalist model in the vehicles that we're addressing social change or trying to affect social change. Timing is everything. We have to look across as activists, as people who want social change, to other issues and look for the current events and the issues of the day. Sometimes issues come to a head and their time has come, and it's really important for all of us to recognize these moments and come out and show our solidarity, jump on board, not to appropriate, but to add strength to their moment, to actually give the momentum that we need. Black Lives Matter. Today, it's just boiling up, and this happens every once in a while in America, where with this deep, entrenched historical racism kind of raising its head every once in a while. And now is a moment that is happening. Police are murdering black people. That's happening right now in a country that's supposed to be the leader of the Western world. We have to really come out in solidarity of this movement and these people. Next slide, please. Such a moment is happening right now with Indigenous people in Canada. And I think now is a really interesting moment because there is, I believe, a real change in Canadians' awareness of problems and the legacy of our colonial country. And this is, I think, an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to link up issues that we have really put in different categories that we have not seen as related. We really have to see the connections between ourselves and Indigenous people, between us and racism and history and current oppression and land. And that connection, I think, is very important, and we have to find a way to connect them, because we're not going to address the oppression of Indigenous peoples without addressing their issues of land and rights, our rights to this land. Here in Canada, we have a situation where the first peoples of the land who have been colonized still exist and are the most oppressed population in the country. Indigenous people around the world have been called the fourth world, just pointing to a fourth level of conditions after the first, second, and third worlds. We have the fourth world. And women, of course, are the most oppressed of that group. In Canada, we have an awareness about the murdered and missing Indigenous women. Between 1980 and 2012, almost 2,000 cases have been documented of murdered and missing women. And last year, the UN found that young First Nations, Inuit, and Métis women were 5 times more likely to be murdered than their non-Aboriginal counterparts. And I look at my nieces and I think about these stats and I think about these facts, and you know, I have to be involved. This is really current and significant because last Thursday, after decades of lobbying, the Government of Canada finally launched an inquiry into the murdered and missing women in Canada, and this is headed by BC's first female First Nations judge, Marianne Buehler. We have to see how our issues are interconnected, because they are, and that's the focus for my talk and in my life. The connections go beyond the environment and Indigenous issues, but that is the focus for my talk and currently in my life. It's between this First Nations rights and equality and the environmental movement. Okay, next slide, please. This is Melina Labucan-Massimo. She's on the left. She's a fierce environmental activist from the Lubicon Cree Nation, and she is with her here in this photo with her sister Bella. 3 summers ago, Bella fell 31 stories from her downtown Toronto apartment, and it's terrible. The case remains unsolved, and Melina and her family live with this unfinished reality of their family. I think we just all have to really put ourselves in these people's shoes and really think about what that must feel like. Next slide, please. Violence against our First Nation women, I believe, is a symptom of our imbalance in society and the violence that we are currently conducting against our earth. In any country, any community, or any family where you have imbalance, oppression, those who are most at risk for violence are women and children. And because women are caregivers, they have the additional role of protection and taking care of everyone. Women are concerned with health of their families and their communities. When women are killed, oppressed, our society, our community continues its imbalance. And this is definitely related to what we're doing to our environment. Here in Canada, we are centralized in urban cities. We are an urban nation. Over 80% of us suddenly live in cities, and that means largely in the south. So right now we're really buffered or sheltered from the extreme extraction that's happening in rural Canada and in the greater world beyond Canada. The violence of today's mining, fracking, bitumen extraction, clear-cut logging. We have logging, clear-cut logging. It's still occurring. It's kind of insane to see, because when you see it, you know it's just so unsustainable. I mean, it doesn't really make sense to turn a forest, a hugely productive forest, into a desert. Mining, the open pit mining, the tailings ponds that we're seeing in North Sea, as well as across Canada, is it's absolutely shocking. And I recommend, if you haven't seen an open pit mine, to take yourself up north and check it out, because it's very, you need to see it for yourself. Fracking, hydraulic fracturing, where rock is cracked open by injection of pressurized liquid of a cocktail of poisons to release natural gas. This is an industry that is really growing. The liquid is water with a toxic mix of chemicals that pollute groundwater and the environment. And this process is now even related with triggering earthquakes. Of course, the extraction of bitumen in the Alberta tar sands. This is the largest construction site on the planet. And the irreversible change that we're making on the planet is visible from space. And this pollution, we hear about contingency funds and contingency plans, but the pollution is largely irreversible. A successful oil spill cleanup is 15% of the oil removed. In remote communities where these resources are being extracted, you have the boom and bust cycle, which is definitely not great for communities. You get a big rise in laborers who are almost entirely men. You get an increase of the sex trade and also a huge rise in drug abuse. And this scene, of course, means a rise in violence. This is not a good scene for community. This is not a good thing for women and girls in these communities. And recently I was speaking with a relative of mine living in Kitimat, which has been completely transformed by preparation for the liquid natural gas terminal. And she talks about just the changes that she's seen, shootings now in her small community because of the rise of gang violence. And she was talking about recently going out for dinner and all of a sudden looking around her in the restaurant, and she realized she was the only woman in the whole place. There was about 100 people in this large restaurant. And of course, there's a similar situation in the northeastern part of our province with all the fossil fuel extraction there. So you can see there are connections. It's not as clear to us living in cities, these very strong connections between violence against women and violence against the earth, but they're very closely linked. I believe also that First Nations, Indigenous people, are key to the environmental movement. They're key to mainstream society finding a way of living sustainably. By and large, Indigenous people have maintained a connection to the earth. It is something that mainstream society has totally lost. Next slide, please. We, as natural allies being in the environmental movement, concerned with land and concerned with sustainability, we need to really foster a deep understanding of what Indigenous perspective really is, really understanding worldviews and relationship to land, because it's these relationships to the land and to the earth that are fundamental to our achieving any sort of real harmony with the natural world. This is my relative and mentor, Guavanut, Diane Brown, and she's just dealing with all these sockeye that we've fished from the Copper River. And this woman has taught me so many fundamental teachings, and perhaps the most important one is just the significance and the import of eating from the land and caring for the land through food. And I can't really express the significance of this, but when you're really getting your livelihood, when you're actually feeding your body with food from the land, and for the Haida living here, it's really about the sea. It's really food from the ocean. When you're sustaining your body and that of your children, when you depend utterly and completely on food that you're harvesting with your own hands, you have such a deep vested personal interest in the sustainability of the land, of the sustainability of the oceans, and you will defend the oceans with, with everything you have. There's a very different perspective of Indigenous people on the environment. It's not this thing that's just outside and that we should preserve as national parks. It's really their home. It's their home, it's their identity, and there's a much different relationship that's much more integrated and not separated as us and then outside the environment. And the food is a direct connection between that outside environment and ourselves. We become the environment through our food. Indigenous means originating or occurring naturally in a particular place. Well, guess what? Human beings are native to planet Earth. We are indigenous to this planet. Still today this is true, and many of us, because we've immigrated from our natal lands, from our places of origin. My mother left England, where her ancestors came from. She left when she was a child, came to Canada. My father's grandparents emigrated from Japan, and so these ties to our ancestral lands have been severed. And I think it's really facilitated us not really understanding this kind of deep connection to the earth or to land itself. But still, Indigenous peoples around the world have by and large maintained those connections, as they still live in those places, and they're holding on to a very deep human identity that I think once upon a time we all had, which is a deep-rooted sense of identity, sense of connection, sense of fundamental responsibility and vulnerability based on the strength of the land. Even though we might not be as connected to land as we once were when we were Indigenous, as now homeless humans, and I feel like mainstream society is a bit homeless that way. We still are dependent on the earth. We don't really believe it. We don't really think about it, but still the fundamental facts are true. We still depend on air, water, and food that comes from life produced here to live. And so we're still very much dependent on the strength and life from planet Earth to be alive. And we need to not only remember that, but I think we need to celebrate it. Even oil. Oil comes from life that once this planet sustained millions of years ago. Everything that we use As my dad says over and over, it comes from the earth. And this is something that Indigenous people know very, very well. Next slide, please. Today, we have a monolithic, dehumanizing economic structure that dictates global culture. In a very short time, it has precipitated this period we are living through a bottleneck for our ethnosphere. And the ethnosphere is a very beautiful concept Wade Davis talks about, which is the idea that on this planet we not only have a biosphere, which is the sum of life on Earth, we not only have an atmosphere, which is this, air that surrounds and blankets the planet, but we also have an ethnosphere, which is the sum total of all the cultures, the songs, the thinking, philosophies, the art, the dances, the beliefs, the religions created by humanity, this beautiful, rich, and diverse blanket around the planet. And it is very sad that in this time of the reduction of diversity, which we are trying our very hardest to do in our globalized human society, we're trying to reduce our diversity on every level, including the ethnosphere. Every 2 weeks, a language goes extinct. And around the world, we're seeing, as societies urbanize, a loss of our traditions, a loss of these practices, a loss of our languages and philosophies. And all of this is affecting the human family's chances for new ideas in order to deal with current and future problems. So all of this is to say, we really have to think about all of these social and Indigenous issues when we consider how to become sustainable as a human race. We don't have a deep understanding of the dependency of our planet's ecological integrity on the Indigenous identity, Indigenous survival, the Indigenous teachings that could save, I think, the rest of us with this fundamental and very ingrained deep concept of respect. Okay, next slide, please. None of our issues are going to be won in isolation. We know it. It's a great concept, this concept of solidarity, but we really need to act it. We need to live it. We need to really understand it. We need to reach out and start building the understanding and solidarity between issues. We need to start going back to our roots and looking at the kind of world that we want to build and the kind of frameworks that we need to construct in our own life, in our own organizations, and our own actions that we want to create in the world in order to build that new paradigm. We need to put the world back together again. Thank you very much.
Severn, thanks so much for what's certainly a provocative and challenging talk. And my head was spinning a bit as you were talking. And one of the things that I thought about was how professionalism has, in a sense, divided us from ourselves. I don't just mean one another, but from who we are as individuals in, how we organize our lives. So I think of my own life. I'm not going to project onto other people, but here's my career has been around primarily working to address poverty and homelessness, and certainly those things have been caused and exacerbated by some of the things you've talked about in terms of globalization being focused on profits and the economy that favors big business and the wealthy over the rest of us, so to speak. But I'm wondering, I consider myself a professional, but I'm other things too. I'm a father, and I'm a partner, and I'm a man, and I'm quite a bit older than you, for example. and I'm proud of the work I've done, but I feel like I'm not doing, may not be doing all the things I should be. So here I'm going to ask you for some advice on putting you on the spot of how you would deal with someone like me. I feel like I've disconnected from my own sense of being a good neighbor, a good person in my community, the citizenship that we used to talk about with pride in terms of how it could be acted on, to a place now where we all work on issue-specific things. And so, how would you and I, if you were going to give me advice or open a door, how would you and I work together as somebody who's talking about issues that I feel passionate about and I support you on, but I'm not engaged in those things. I'm engaged in the work that I do and limited by some of the things around my own organization about what I can do. How do we shake free of our current conventions and work together on the things that you're talking about when we're all pressed for time and we all have to earn a living? What advice would you give me on how to make some changes so I can work with you and others on the things you're talking about?
Great question, and a challenging one, because I hear myself saying all our issues are connected, and then how can we possibly have time to actually focus and actually make a difference in any area if we're so concentrated on how solidarity and all of this. I think it's very challenging. One thing that I have really been musing on for the last few years is returning to human scales. And I think one of the things that's happening right now with this huge explosion, especially in technology and screens and cell phones, so we can be busier than ever, even though the great dream, as I understand, of technology was that it was going to free up all our time. But now, we can be working all the time. We have these, smartphones and all of these tools that allow us to be more productive. But what I'm finding for myself anyways, and I'm sure that others share this feeling, is you're working harder than ever, but you can't even remember what it is that you've been working on. I mean, you're working so flat out and on so many different things, and the sense of real accomplishment or actually changing the world is not increasing. I think that we have fallen out of step with what actually makes sense for us as human animals, as human beings. And I think therein might lie some of the solution. Part of returning to human scales is really being part of a community. It's not just a service that an individual can, be a good citizen or be a good community member. It is actually a joy. It's actually wonderful to be to participate, to spend time with friends, to eat together, to work together. It is actually something that I believe is a human need, and it's something that's been eroded and disrupted in the last 50 years because of our globalized economic system that has worked to cut out the human interactions. And in the last few years, as I've moved to a small community and started a family, and so kind of by default had to be a bit more community-minded, but also living rurally, I've seen a new power, and I've never felt so in tune with the effects of my work as when I've scaled it down to what I consider a more human scale. And I think that we all should do that, not only as good citizens, do-gooders. I think that we need it. I think we need to have a kind of relationship with our community that it is better, making the world a better place, but that is also making us better, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So that's my kind of convoluted answer is I think we can engage, we should make time for ourselves to engage as a good neighbor, as a good community member, a place to start connecting with the issues that I'm talking about. I think we really, as Native Canadians, we need to reach out and start asking, at the very least, start asking questions. Who are the Indigenous people of this area? Where do they live? Where are they visible in our society? What are the, where can I, where are points of interaction and contact and working together? And I think that we would find that there's huge overlap between the issues that we're concerned with and issues in Indigenous society. It's so crazy how there's two solitudes right now in Canada, and such a separation between Indigenous Canada and non-Indigenous Canada. And I think all of us can work on that, and actually it would be a joy.
Thanks for that, Severn. For me, you've raised a question I'm going to need to spend some time with for myself. I feel like I believe that I've provided a whole bunch of good service over the years to my community, however you might define that. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's bigger. But I'm now wondering about to what extent I actually have a relationship with that community. And I think that's the question you're stirring in my head, so I appreciate that. I think it's questions that we need to ask ourselves that sometimes will need to change. Before I ask the next question, just want to make sure that our participants have time to ask theirs. So if you have any questions, I believe you type them into your chat box and we'll start collecting them. So do that now if you want to ask Severn something. But I'm going to ask this question, Severn. Now let's assume we are more connected to community, that we are returning to some of the more natural and some, I call them organic ways that we can connect by eating together, just spending time without an agenda, and getting to know each other and connect each other. But if we were going to, as a part of that community, let's say you and I are part of that community, and we have some other people that we really value, what would we want to work on at a larger scale? And I kind of think of things as game changers. There are big things that if we affect change, they'll affect all kinds of other things. So in my field, I talk about housing the homeless. If we house the homeless, all kinds of other things happen for a homeless individual. They're safer, they can stay cleaner, they have access to support. Many curtailers stop drinking and so forth. You understand where I'm going. From the context of your work and what you've been talking about, and if we were going to work on some things together, and it was 2 or 3 big game changers that we should rally around, what would they be? What would your voice be around what those game changers should be?
Great question. Well, just kind of what, in the context of what you just said about, with housing the homeless, which I can see as being a huge game changer, I would respond that a game changer would be to find a way for small rural communities to still have viability. Across Canada, we've seen a death of small communities, as we've seen, the rise of of these huge farms with huge big corporations taking over our farming, as well as so many of our industries that used to be, on more of a small scale and more locally based, extraction companies. Now we just have these huge, in often cases, multinationals that are taking over that, and so we've had this huge migration to urban centers. Just having a way for people to still live in their small towns also would help address the homeless situation as well. For so many reasons, having somewhere to live, a lot of people originate from more rural communities. They want to stay, but they don't have work, and they move to the cities and they can't make it, and they sometimes find themselves homeless, for example. So enabling people to stay in small communities. Another thing that I've seen here, obviously there's no one who's homeless here. You know, the whole population of the islands is like 4,500. People really take care of each other because you know, it's on a human scale. You can take care on this level, and the generosity here is amazing. You know, but that sense of community, and then you just can't have that in big city at a certain level. So that's one thing I think, you know, would really address a lot of things, is helping small communities be viable. Hey, well, we're dreaming big here. Another thing I see as a game changer that might seem unrelated, but I think is totally connected, is universal healthcare. Universal childcare. It's crazy that Canada doesn't have universal childcare. I mean, what a huge game changer for women, being able to, yeah, of course, go back to work, but what it means is women being able to take leadership and have a voice in our country. This is a big, big deal, and you know, other first world nations have universal child care, and I mean, the ramifications for women and community in this country would be absolutely huge. And then the third thing I'd offer is we have to bite the bullet and get off of fossil fuels. Well, we're talking game changer here, you know. Everybody's still humming and hawing and saying, well, we want to support the Paris targets and we don't want to exacerbate climate change, but we really can't just do what scientists and you know, all kinds of advocacy groups and people have analyzed and said is possible. We're not ready to really take that strong a leadership, and I worry that without bold action, it's you know, it's not going to happen. It's kind of a chicken and egg kind of thing, you know, like Germany committing to go solar and investing hugely in solar technology, then brought the price down for the whole world. But without that bold action of just going for it, we wouldn't have seen that. And that's what we absolutely need. We just need that kind of leadership. And I guess we're going to need a kind of groundswell to make that happen. But if we don't make that happen soon, we're really condemning our children. And we have to do it. So do it now.
Thanks, Severn. As you were talking about fossil fuels, I was thinking about the habits we get into, and so I'm nodding my head with affirmation of things you're saying, and I know we need to get off fossil fuels, and then, you know, later today I might get in my car and drive to 7-Eleven, which is 4 blocks away. You know, it's like we get into those habits that we just need to break, but we also need the big change, the bold actions, like you mentioned, that Germany was leading, also to lead the way. Anyway, I want to see if, Sienna, are there any questions that we have from our participants that you want to share with Severn?
Hi, so we don't actually have any questions coming through right now, but we do have a comment from Sheila Morrison, who's on the call, and she was just saying that it's an absolute privilege to be participating today and be a part of this conversation. So I wanted to share that with you. And I just had a reflection myself as I was listening. Severn, when you're talking about reconnecting with food and how, you know, when we eat, that's how, you know, we become the earth and we become reconnected with the environment. And it just made me think of an organization in London, Ontario, Growing Chefs, and their mandate is all about getting kids excited about food. And so much of what they do is reconnecting kids with food, from planting seeds to growing to prepping to making and learning more about food. And I think, you know, it's a great example of the types of things that we want to see everywhere, is, you know, teaching younger generations to really appreciate and really connect with their food, because like you said, it does grow from there, because then all of a sudden you have this new perspective on the earth and you have this new perspective on your dependency on the earth. And so I thought that was really, really insightful. I'm really glad that you shared that.
Thanks, and that's an example, a great example of how, you know, something that you seem to be addressing on one level actually is addressing so many other things. And I think that's part of when you are doing work at a human scale, you can really see all these different interlinkages. You know, those kids are spending time outside. They are learning about, you know, how to cook. They're learning about nutrition. They are, you know, adjusting their palates. We have a huge obesity crisis in Canada right now, and you're addressing that in a joyful, positive, empowering way. And so many aspects of the community engagement and engaging with sustainable practices are exactly that. You know, they're fun. They engender friendships, and a big thing that I'm really interested in is self-confidence. As a mom, I'm seeing, you know, hearing all these stats and facts about young people today not being as self-confident, and this, you know, might be connected to, you know, this real focus on screen time, on social media, and this different way of interacting. You know, we have to make sure that our kids maintain a connection to the physical world, the real world, and a way of actually having some skills. I think skills with their hands is another very human thing that is very much part of community engagement and is very much something that can give self-esteem to kids. So all those things are addressed, and you know, it might seem like not very much because you're not changing policy or changing you know, these fundamental structures, but I think you're changing fundamental culture, and that is what we really have to do in order to create a groundswell for politics.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, with these kids, when you're changing their perspective, they might be the people to grow up and change those policies, right? So we have a couple questions coming through. So you just mentioned again human scale. So Lynn's asking, is working at human scale possible while also working at a game-changing level?
Absolutely. I totally believe it is, and I think it is necessary. I think that when you're working at a very high level, in order to stay connected, stay grounded, stay empowered, stay remembering why you're doing it, I think you have to have a certain amount of energy focused on, yeah, that human scale, that human connection. It really keeps you right in sync with what is actually needed on the ground level. And I think that that's the way of keeping you honest when you're doing this high-level policy stuff or negotiating, you know, which can kind of get really far away from the actual issues on the ground. So I believe it's absolutely imperative. You know, and on the other side, I think, you know, you have all these community organizers and people who are just amazing, dynamic people that are doing so much good. And wouldn't it be amazing to have those people be somehow connected to actual higher level policy that's made that totally has effects on their work? You know, I'm saying that we need this kind of grassroots work, this human scale action, but we need game changers. We need that higher level stuff too, because, you know, I mean, Mark, just to respond to your saying that, you know, yes, conceptually you understand that we can't depend on fossil fuels anymore, and then you'll just like drive for 2 minutes somewhere just out of habit. You know, through my life of being focused on environmental issues, I've gone through phases of believing that it's, you know, it's all up to individual responsibility. You got to really, you know, take responsibility for all our actions. We got to, you know, we got to bring our coffee cups everywhere and our water bottles, which I still totally do. But, you know, if you actually look at our society and all the choices you have to make every day, you know, our whole society is set up unsustainably. So that means as an individual, you are swimming against the tide in such a crazy way, and it really can absorb your energy as well. We need a game changer to help us do the right thing, to help it not be so hard. If there was just a sea change in policy, and, you know, of course there's going to be detractors saying, well, you know, big government just saying, no, you can't drive your car. But if there were different regulations, you know, no driving your cars on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or some, you know, just starting to kind of shift the frame, our whole society would adjust. So your work would know on Tuesday and Thursdays that, well, you have to consider, you know, maybe different times for work, or maybe some kind of set up some kind of bus system, or, I mean, systems would appear because humans are so adaptable. But if we won't change unless we have the impetus. And also, we don't like to change unless we know that everybody has to change. If we know that it's a level playing field and everyone on the block has to do the same thing, we will have far less resistance to doing that thing, rather than it's just this altruistic, like, one thing that you're doing and nobody else is doing. I think that's a huge barrier. So we need those high-level changes to facilitate us doing the wrong thing, because right now we're all being facilitated doing the wrong thing, and it's having huge effects. So I believe you really need both. They need each other, and I think we as individuals need both in order to feel sustained as people working for social change.
Awesome, thanks. So we have a couple more questions, but I think we only have time for one more. So for those of you that
I'll try to be quick.
Yeah, so for everybody who sent in questions, we'll be sure to forward the questions along to Severn and Mark and see if we can get some responses for those. But this other question is from Sandy, and she's talking about where you live and saying, you know, where you are, you have close connections with Indigenous communities. How can those of us living in urban centers connect with and learn from Indigenous communities?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's something that I still don't feel like I have the best answer to, because every community is so different. I think, first of all, just doing some research on your own is important. It's shocked me over the years how, you know, for years I've been asking event coordinators who the Indigenous people are of the land where the event is happening, and the organizers will have no idea. But actually, this has changed in the last, like, 2 years. Now, especially people who are considers themselves progressive, they do know, and that's a start. You know, who are the people of this place? Who have been living here for millennia? That's a good start. And where do they live today? You know, learning some of the history. And then starting to look at, you know, well, do they have events where the public is invited? And there's often events that are public. In Vancouver, there's all kinds of different celebrations where the community is invited. And, you know, I know that there's powwows and events across the country. And, you know, those are really good points of connection and contact and education. I mean, really, that's the starting point, is just starting to learn, starting to be educated. But we just need more spaces and events and places for connection, because I think it shocks me how little interaction there is in between the populations, and we have to create those spaces. Volunteering, you know, in different friendship houses, that's also another way. But really, those public events, I think, are really good things to look for, and to start getting more knowledgeable about the people.
Severn, I wish we had more time, because I'm sure we could talk for a lot longer. Here's some of the things I'm going away with that you've talked about and sparked inside of me. One is the use of the term human scale, which makes perfect sense, but I've not really thought about that and how I might apply that to my life. So that's certainly a takeaway, especially in terms of how we might deal with game changers on a human scale. I like that image, and I like the challenge of trying to know what to do with it. Also, the viability of small communities as a game changer also makes me think of the viability of neighborhoods, because I think in urban centers we've gotten away from neighborhoods. I'm lucky I know my two closest neighbors, but I don't really know too many others on my block. Universal child care, I'm sure we're all with you. You're speaking to the converted here. And then the concept of bold actions, especially by governments, but also by groups. And then the big thing that you reminded me of is all bold actions, all transformational change, this is really what we're talking about, always end up with being driven by and causing personal change. And so we're the ones that need to create that space for engagement. We're the ones that need to work on the human scale of things. We're the ones that need to stop driving to 7-Eleven. I like your idea of Tuesdays and Thursdays off from using cards. But it's the big message for me coming out of all the great things we were talking about is transformational change means I have to change, not you and others. And so I appreciate that. Really looking forward to hearing you speak at the CCI in September and working with you between now and then as we head towards that great event. Thanks so much, Severn, for being a part of our webinar today. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. This has been great. Thank you very much for your great questions.
And that leaves it to me to do a final thank you to both you, Severn and Mark, for sharing your insights and perspectives on this call today. And so many thanks to everyone who's joined us and for your comments and questions. It's certainly helped make this more thought-provoking and is leaving us with something to think about as we go into our afternoons. I'd also like to thank our supporters, Human Resources and Social Development Canada, Maytree Foundation, J.W. McConnell Family Foundation, and the Province of Canada for, again, making these calls possible. So as promised, in a few days, we will email you with the links to the audio and other materials related to today's call. We also welcome your feedback on these calls, so please do email us at tamarack@tamarackcommunity.ca to let us know how we're doing. We also invite all of our listeners today to sign up to receive Engage. Engage is our online magazine published monthly that provides you with the latest thinking through our articles, news, and resources about community change leaders. We also invite you to register for the next session in our Community Change webinar series. Our next session is entitled Innovation Starts with People. It will feature Carolyn Curtis, CEO of the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, and Dr. Ingrid Burkett, Social Design Fellow at the Centre. This webinar will be pre-recorded, so by registering you can receive it directly in your inbox on August 25th and listen whenever you're ready. You can also register for the 5th webinar in this series entitled Collective Impact 3.0, which is featuring Liz Weaver and evaluation expert Mark Cabage on September 12th. You can find out more and register for all of these webinars and events on our website at www.tamarackcommunity.ca. The Tamarack team would also like to personally invite you to join us at the inaugural Community Change Institute taking place in the vibrant city of Toronto this fall from September 26th to 30th. This 5-day event will feature 4 world-renowned speakers, including Severn, who you've heard from today, 40 workshops, and over 250 change makers from across the globe. Details about this incredible learning opportunity can be found on the events section of our website. We encourage you to visit our website, www.tamarackcommunity.ca, to explore the latest in community change and access our fully stocked resource library. Thank you so much to Severn and Mark and to all of you today for joining us. Have a great day.